Hi, welcome back. Today we're going to talk about how to write better sentences. And in this mini lecture, there are about 25 slides, but we should get through it pretty quickly. Okay, let's get right to it. One of the biggest problems in writing is wordiness. It's probably the biggest problem for editors as well. A sentence should contain no unnecessary words, a paragraph no unnecessary sentences, for the same reason that a drawing should have no unnecessary lines and a machine no unnecessary parts. Very good advice. And yes, the number one writing problem that editors see is truly a lack of clarity, wordiness. So my suggestion is to write to express, not to impress. Wordiness is an obstacle to both a reader's understanding and to your success as a writer. Let me give you an example, so listen to this sentence. Implementation of the new innovation plan will be done at the supervisory level prior to others. So if we cut out the clutter, you have supervisors will implement the new plan first. Same meaning, far less words. That's what we want to strive for. All right, let me give you another example. Listen to this. Insight into the pathogenic mechanisms involved in the development of disseminated intravascular coagulation in septic patients is offered. So it could have been, we examined the pathogenesis of disseminated intravascular coagulation in septic patients. So it was 18 words versus 11 words. Truth is, sentences over 17 words tend to discourage readers. So we do this all the time. So when you look at phrases, let's reduce the number of words. Here's a graph that gives you an idea. Instead of saying a limited number, let's say one, an overwhelming amount, most, a proportion of, some, and you can read the rest of that and get the idea. Anytime we can reduce the number of words and get better to the meaning of the sentence, the better off we are. A little bit more about wordiness. Don't repeat words or ideas in a sentence. For instance, the patient received palliative, non-curative therapy. Let's not repeat those comments. Be aware that the words who, which, and that often clutter up sentences. The drug that the physician ordered, we can leave out that. Also, get in the habit of sharpening your words. Use a precise meaning. For instance, not infrequently we see problems similar to this. Well, how often is not infrequently? So sharpen your words, make them mean what you want them to mean. Okay, I'm going to go through about 7 guidelines as it relates to writing better sentences. And the first one is to write with subjects and verbs. For instance, the physician noticed the smell of acetone on the patient's breath. The subject is physician, it's strong, it's clear, it's a familiar word, it occurs early in the sentence, and it's close to the verb noticed. Now here's the example of a poor sentence. Coincident with this re-emphasis on the biological basis of psychiatry in the 1960s, community psychiatry, and concern about issues of content. Well, you get the message as I'm reading this. It's just painful to even read it. It's painful for a couple of reasons. One is the subject, psychiatry, and concern does not appear until the middle of this tremendously long sentence. The verb phrase came to dominate is also separated by several words from the subject. So take a minute to see if you can fix that. Okay, number 2, choosing strong verbs. Well, strong verbs carry more of a sentence's central message than other words if they're used properly. Some strong verb examples are prepare, study, think. They're in active voice and they don't depend on modifiers to clarify their meaning. A little bit about weak verbs. Weak verbs are typically the verbs of being. Be, was, been, were. And intransitive verbs, those that do not have an object to complete their meaning. The patient was lying down. Was lying is an intransitive verb because it does not transfer action to an object. The physician helped lay the patient on the surgery table. Lay is a transitive word because it transfers actions to the direct object, the patient. Okay, number 3, active and passive voice. Use the active and passive voices appropriately. The active voice This is grammatical subject performs the action. For instance, pharmacists selected the drugs that should be stored in the emergency department. This is active because the subject, pharmacists, performs the act of selecting. The active voice is generally more interesting and more acceptable to editors, so it should be used when it is important for the reader to know who or what performed the action. On the other hand, let's talk about the passive voice. The subject is acted on by someone or something. Drugs to be stored in the emergency department were selected by staff members. This is passive because the subject, drugs, is acted on. It receives the action of the staff members. The passive voice should be used when it is not known who or what performed the action. Now let me be clear, there are times when the passive voice is okay. The following sentence puts emphasis where it belongs. Enzyme concentrations were determined. If written in active voice, the sentence becomes longer and adds information really not needed. Laboratory technologists perform the enzyme concentration studies. We expect the lab to do the tests, so the additional information is really not required. Okay, number 4, sentences. Well, how long should sentences be? Well, sentences of 40 or more words are difficult for most readers to comprehend, so we should probably use that as a good guide. Okay, number 5, watch where you're going. In other words, don't back into a sentence's main point. For instance, in contrast to the previously mentioned forms of VT in children that are associated with clearly defined forms of cardiovascular disease, there appear to be a number of patients with VT in whom heart disease is either covert or absent. Well, let's try that again. Here's a better way. Some young patients with VT, in contrast to those previously mentioned, appear to have covert heart disease or no heart disease. I think you see the difference there. All right, number 6, parallelism. Parallel structure of sentence elements contribute to clarity, rhythm, and ease of reading. For instance, she was required to give injections, type letters, and filing all correspondence. This makes the reader wonder if they read the sentence correctly. Also, bad grammar. The third phrase should be, and file all correspondence. Get the point? So it's real clear that faulty parallelism can detract from the impact of the sentence. Look at this either-or example. Here's a faulty one. The treatment must either produce a negative culture in 24 hours or it is inadequate. The proper way is the treatment must either produce a negative culture in 24 hours or it must be replaced. Okay, number 7, dangling modifiers. Dangling modifiers, sometimes called idiomatic expressions. A dangling modifier is a word or phrase that modifies a word not clearly stated in the sentence. A modifier describes, clarifies, or gives more detail about a concept. Words that dangle in a sentence are usually at the beginning. They are often participles, verbs, forms ending in ing or ed, are participial phrases. Participles modify the subject of a sentence or the subject of the main clause that follow it. Okay, so here's an example. Talking to the patient, his eyes focused on the red marks on her arms. Well, talking to the patient is a dangling modifier. Are his eyes talking to the patient? A better structure would be, while talking to the patient, his eyes focused on the red marks on her arms. This is no longer a dangling modifier. Okay, now just to complicate things, take a look at this sentence. Having finished the assignment, Jill turned on the TV. Well, having finished states an action but does not name the doer of that action. In English sentences, the doer must be the subject of the main clause that follows. In this sentence, it's Jill. She seems logically to be the one doing the action, having finished. Therefore, this sentence does not have a dangling modifier. Now be careful about common idiomatic expressions, such as mentioned here, burning the candle at both ends. You can bank on it, barking up the wrong tree. You sort of get the point. Just be careful that you use those appropriately. Now, if you do a lot of writing, one of the best resources that I've seen as it relates to sentence writing is this textbook here, Better Sentence Writing in 30 Minutes a Day by Diana S. Campbell. It's not very expensive, and it's a nice thing to have on your bookcase. Now let me mention here that I realize that much of the things that we talk about in these mini lectures you've heard before, either in grammar school or high school or other places. Although I think it's good to revisit this at times, it certainly is for me. So thanks for listening today, and I'll see you down the road.